Spotlight, lectures and performances on and around Albany State University.
Well, I just continue my talk, but I will put my emphasis, in this presentation I put my emphasis on the portrayal of Chinese women in Chinese media. What you are seeing here is in ancient times, in ancient China, of course, the mass media did not exist in ancient China, basically. Nothing like the media we have today. But still, there was such image, there was such notion of what's the image of women, the image of beautiful women. And in China, we talk about the four ancient beauty of China. They have names, but you can see their image, the ideal, the beauty ideal. They look very similar, except for one of them look a little bit close to Western beauty ideas. And of course, all these women are either wives or wives of the royal family. I want to talk a little bit about the ancient Confucian ideal of womanhood and how it was portrayed in the past, and then we talk about modern time. The Confucian text prescribes that the modern woman must follow 3 obeys. If you are a girl, if you're a young girl, you must obey your father, right? No big deal. But if you are a wife, as wives, Chinese women must obey their husbands. And as widow, even after your husband died, you still have to obey men, obey your adult sons. So absolutely no rights, no power, inferior to men, as in ancient time. This is the ancient classic for girls. It says it is very important for a virgin living in the inner chamber to be careful and cautious about what she says. Never laugh loudly, and never speak in loud voice, or she will have a bad name among neighbors. That's the ancient image of what was a good woman. Always walk in sedate manner, and never lean against a door frame or a wall when standing. So just an example of showing the image of ancient women, good image, so-called good image. You can see that in ancient China, it's a very restrained environment for women. The insight of women's liberation, as I also mentioned in my last presentation, starts at the fall of Qing dynasty, China's last dynasty. And at the same time, China experienced a new cultural movement, which gave birth to, we began to see women's magazines at that time. These women's magazines are the avant-garde of they promoted women's rights, women's well-being. They call for women's rights for education and freedom to choose their spouses. So these are the emphasis of that time. These are probably the most important issues. And then, of course, after China's wars, the Second World War and the Civil War, Mao's revolution follows, and the socialism movement pushed for women's rights. Some scholars have analyzed the Chinese media and found today women are portrayed, and they presented how Chinese women are portrayed nowadays. The image of Chinese women influenced by socio-economic and political ideological changes in China. It's very complicated now. So rather than literal portrayal of the reality, Well, that's media. Mass media never does that. Mass media never literally portray the reality. So it's a symbolic representation of the Chinese women created through interaction of party ideology, editorial policy, and readers' taste, as well as changing reality of Chinese women's life and work. Indeed, in the past few decades, under the communist rule, China has experienced drastic social change. Under the same regime, 1950s is very, very different from today's China. So these changes coincide with the image of women portrayed in media and social status of women as well. These studies also talk about many different factors that influence these changes. Party ideology. It's a single-party society, and party ideology is dominant. It's now less dominant than before. So now we see women's image is changing as this ideology changes. The interlocking of party control and societal influences has determined the typical image of Chinese women suited to particular periods of time in the contemporary Chinese society. Some scholars analyze just the state-run Chinese media. Of course, almost all the media in China are under either direct or indirect control of the state. So this study focused on state-run. They found that women are portrayed as workers, half the sky, equal working rights. Women are also portrayed as housewives. Well, and they are portrayed as consumers. Equal, sort of, but not entirely. So women have tremendous burden on their shoulder. They have to work, but they also have to take care of their families, where men only have to work. So these studies found a discursive representation emphasizing equality, where at the same time depict women as inferior to men. And this is in state-run media. Well, this is an interesting phenomenon in 2008. iPhone is also very popular in China. And you all know that most iPhones are made in China. So a British man found in his new iPhone contained photographs of a smiling woman, a young woman, on an iPhone assembly line in China. The photos quickly spread across the internet. The worker was dubbed iPhone Girl. So the scholars are analyzed the phenomenon why these photos quickly spread across the internet. Well, so they found that digital culture represents the Asian female as a vessel for fantasies of sex, submissiveness, and adventure. Such fantasies deeply inform the reception of electronic assemblers, including iPhone Girl. And you can see this. This is the image of the iPhone Girl. You can see she is behind the assembly line. And this report is from China Daily. That's China's leading English language newspaper. As time changes, of course, women are getting stronger and stronger, and our society moves forward. And women are getting bolder and bolder as well, more and more assertive. Recent analysis found that women are not always submissive, are not always inferior. An analysis of popular matchmaking TV show found these themes in young women's talk. So, future generation. Sharp talk is prominent, a prominent theme. Also, women do not lack humor. So that's a good trade. Lady talk. Baby talk. When they choose to. Cursing. Okay, you will never see cursing in sharp talk or in the classic for girls, right? So things have changed a lot. For good, for better. For good or for bad. You judge. Thank you.
Okay, now we are going to move in time and space. We are going to go to Spain and at the end of century 18. I'm going to talk about the resistance of the patriarchal oppression in Tristana. Who is Tristana? Tristana is the main character and also the name of the novel, okay? Benito Pérez skillfully reproduced the 19th century Spanish society into one of the most famous novels, Tristana. This novel is a classic example of determinism, which is based on the philosophical idea that every event or state of affairs, including every human decision and action, is inevitable and necessary consequence of antecedent conditions and events. The feminine character Tristana illustrates clearly this idea. Tristana is an orphan adopted by the nobleman Don Lope Garrido. Don Lope Garrido falls in love with her and thus treats her as both a daughter and a wife at the age of 19. However, at the age of 22, she meets a young artist, Horacio Diaz, and falls in love with him. At this point, Tristana realizes that she has no freedom. She is trapped by the rules of society. In this paper, I will discuss Tristana's attempt to become liberated from patriarchal domination, the ethical issues associated with her search for freedom, and the determination shown by her to hinder the repression so ingrained in that period. Patriarchal domination is a form of power considered as one of the most cruel, authoritarian, and despotic relationships in the world. This type of relationship is present in both public and private social relations. It can be said that we can identify those type of relations of domination in religion, arts, customs, matrimonial relationship, and many other areas. Therefore, it can be stated that most social relations are ruled by patriarchal domination, and the theme of female liberation, in which the woman is the main subject, is directly related to defiance and conflict of domination. According to Theodore Kiros, power and domination are not the same. He asserts that, quote, power as a domination is destructive of possibility inherent in human power. Domination impovers one's self-confidence and destroys one's capacity to grow, change, and evolve, end quote. He also states that, quote, power as self-empowerment, grounded upon the premise that humans are capable of self-construction and self-constitution, is creative, transformative, and enriching. In Galdós' novel, Lope's power over Tristana affected her self-confidence and her development as a human being. Since Tristana was adopted by Lope, he dominated her psychologically and spiritually. Lope taught her not to love herself, which destroyed not only her capacity to grow and progress, but also her confidence. As the narrator reveals, Tristana was a pure, quote, a pure ermine, a spirit of grace, a true image of a Japanese lady. She is described as if, quote, she was anything and everything at the same time, because she belonged to him. Like a shuttlecock and badminton, a piece of furniture or a piece of cloth which nobody could dispute, and she seemed so willing to be the shuttlecock and always a shuttlecock to be used and thrown around at will, end quote. Tristana was also psychologically abused by Lope. She did not possess the mental capacity of making her own decisions. As the narrator says, quote, Mr. Lopez imposed himself on her in such a way that in his presence she never reacted against anything he did or said, end quote. Physically, the narrator describes Don Lope as a 57-year-old gallant gentleman who wears fine clothes. Psychologically, Lope is both ambiguous and manipulative. Mr. Lopez, while in the social sphere, is affable and courteous, but, quote, at his house, he knows how to articulate words with authority of a master, end quote. His behavior is predicated on the convenience of a situation. He ignores social values when he's engaged in his Don Juan character. However, when maintaining a domination over Tristana, Lope relies on the 19th century society code of honor. When Lope suspects that Tristana has a boyfriend, he says, your mother entrusts me to care for you, and as such, I decide to protect you against unforeseen traps and to defend your honor, end quote. In this instance, Lope refers to the honor, a value socially constructed in the 19th century society that was based on what people will say, to maintain Tristana under his control. Lope's discourse had such significant influence on Tristana that for years she didn't realize the reality of her situation. Tristana, quote, accepted that this lifestyle almost without realizing its importance. Just the time and the methodical continuation of her dishonor gave her time to see her sad reality, end quote. Living with Lope without being married made Tristana seclude from society. This situation is emphasized by the narrator when he presents a series of hypotheses about the relationship between Tristana and Lope, with him considering her in multiple roles: niece, wife, daughter, lover. Lope's power over Tristana, as Kira said previously, is presented as a way of domination, therefore reducing Tristana's self-esteem, her capacity to grow, change, and develop as a human being. For these reasons, Tristana, quote, at the age of 22, had an undeveloped sense of morality, strived to develop her own ideas, and could only make decisions based on what the other people thought, end quote. Tristana is aware that in 19th century society, the opinion of others about oneself is very important. Consequently, she feels marginalized, and her self-esteem is also affected by the rejection of this society. Nevertheless, Foucault states in his History of Sexuality that where there is power, there is resistance. Consequently, resistance grows within a relationship of power. Thus, there is hope for Tristana. Foucault also states that the subject in extreme condition of domination can be inspired against hegemonic ideas and also change the way they see things. That's exactly what happened to Tristana, who at the age of 22 became aware of her situation. Tristana thinks, quote, here I am, don't you see how I think big? She begins to feel the hatred and repugnance towards the miserable life she had with Lope. End quote. Tristana reveals to Saturna, their house servant, her desire to be independent and free. Freedom, according to Aristotle, is the opposite to dependence on external condition and contingency. In other words, one cannot be free if one depends on external conditions and contingency to govern one's life. Here also states that freedom is ethical when one's will and desire is in harmony with reason. In this view, Tristana needs to do a self-evaluation if her desire for freedom is reasonable. Deep inside, Tristana seems to consider these issues. She is aware that it will be difficult to be reintegrated into this society and obtain what she calls honorable liberty. However, Tristana takes Aristotle's concept of freedom to an extreme. Her approach to her search for freedom, as Jean-Paul Sartre believed, seemed to be unconditional. Initially, Tristana had no realization that her values did not meet the requirements to reintroduce her back into society. She believed she could obtain an honorable liberty by having a profession that would allow her to support herself. She wants to rebuild her self-esteem through professional competence. Tristana's self-esteem depends on her hopes, desires, and aspirations, and her ability to realize them with confidence and strength of character. Her first attempt to build her self-esteem is to create her own values. The possibility of creating her own values that reflects her authentic desires could empower her to bravely seek freedom as a self-realization goal. As a result, Tristana begins to create some potential condition for her life, and this is, in itself, an expression of liberty. Upon revealing her ideas to Saturna thinks, quote, Tristana is a fool if she thinks that all of this can support a free and honest lady, end quote. Subsequently, the narrator reveals to us Tristana's sad thoughts. Quote, how lonely she would be out there in the world without her poor and antiquated gentleman, end quote. Nonetheless, Tristana is optimistic with her plans for a new life. She dreams about the endless possibility of living free. However, at this point, the only freedom Tristana really enjoys are her trips to Madrid, the games she plays with the neighbor, and her visit to Saturna's son in the orphanage. It is during one of these visits to the orphanage that Tristana meets Horacio Diaz and falls in love with him. Horacio is a young and handsome artist who seemed to fit perfectly into Tristana's plans. Horacio becomes pivotal to Tristana's freedom. Both Horacio and Tristana are idealists. They seem to complement each other and live moments of passion together, moments in which they play like children. At the beginning of their relationship, Horacio motivates Tristana to pursue a profession. And according to Tristana, since she knows and trusts Horacio, she becomes fearless and brave. Love, quote, had enlightened her to her own intelligence, stimulating and creating ideas within her, end quote. Horacio, as mediator for Tristana's liberty and source for her bravery, encourages her to break with, quote, these nefarious relations, end quote, and leave Mr. Lopez as soon as possible. However, Mr. Lopez still wields tremendous power over Tristana. He insinuates to her that he is aware of her relationship with someone else. She quickly turns pale and becomes afraid. Knowing that Tristana does not have the financial means to live independently this time, Lopez cynically states that Tristana is materially free and sarcastically tells her she really does not understand the limitations regarding her freedom. Nevertheless, Tristana angrily responds to Lopez, quote, I don't fear anything. Kill me whenever you want, end quote. As a result, Tristana decides to openly express her love for Horacio by having intimate relations with him. Eventually, Horacio, quote, starts to notice that his young girlfriend was growing and he feels inferior to her. Her change surprised and bothered him because the Tristana he dreamed about should be subordinated to man's desire and intelligence, end quote. Like Lope, Horacio wanted a woman who would meet the social expectations of that century. He does not accept an emancipated woman as his companion. Horacio, who was pivotal to Tristana's search for freedom, particularly at the beginning of their relationship, is now identified as an individual attached to the traditional values of a relationship between a man and a woman. Clearly, it creates a social and psychological barrier between these two lovers. Horacio's feeling toward Tristana is now torn. He wants to share his life with her, but at the same time, he cannot figure out how this will happen. Mentally, Horacio knows he cannot live with an independent woman. He decides to go on vacation with his aunt to think about things. He does not feel regretful for doing this, but Tristana, on the other hand, feels a deep feeling of suffering. These lovers, during times they were separated, used to send love letters to each other. Subsequently, Tristana no longer has the same feeling for Horacio as she did when they first met and began a relationship. At this time, Tristana begins to feel an extreme pain in her knee. Because of this pain, her desire for liberty is threatened. Besides social and psychological restrictions, Tristana now faces a physical restriction that culminates with the amputation of her leg. Necessity, contingency, and unpredictability prevent Tristana from gaining her freedom. These factors threaten her ability to make any rational deliberations or decisions. Eventually, Tristana and Lope decide to get married for different reasons. Lope does it to inherit money from his aunt. Tristana succumbs to the control of church and social norms. Her freedom was not an unconditional choice as she thought. It was influenced by the dominant nature, culture, and social norms of the 19th century. There is no love between them because to truly love someone, one must first love oneself. The behavior of someone who is trying to find comfort in the affirmation of another, or in the control over another, or in the surrender of the control to another, generates a false and a temporary peace of mind that is simply a substitute for peace of truly knowing oneself. Tristana thought she had found the right approach for gaining her freedom by seeking freedom through love and aspiring to have a profession. However, her lack of self-esteem prevented her from experiencing life as it truly is, without hesitation, denial, or attachment. If Tristana had attained high self-esteem, she could have safely looked beyond herself, confident that her inner being was secure and happy. In the 19th century scientific terms, Tristana's needs can be related to determinism. Unlike Sartre's concept of liberty, freedom at this time is not an unconditional choice, and a person does not have the capacity to build his or her own being and world. Tristana's reality was determined by law, which caused her to suppress her thoughts, feelings, and actions. Therefore, liberty for Tristana became an unattainable illusion. That's it. Gracias. Thank you. Question for Dr. Zhou or for me?
Value of titles and women's equality. So if we could all just settle down a bit. On this panel we have Dr. Amber Deane and Dr. Melissa Gosdin. Dr. Judith Rosenbaum Andre won't be here. Dr. Geneva Diamond is here in her stead. And Professor Leticia Alvira Watson and myself, Dr. Devona Mallory. All right. Well, the reason we have this panel is, if you notice, we all have professional titles. But as a woman, we have discovered that we typically don't get called by the titles we earned. And that's why we decided to have this panel, Call Me Maybe. Okay. We usually get referred to as young lady, miss, and as opposed to our male colleagues who get doctor and all those different types of names. So,
yeah, as she was saying, you know, some men are called professor, period, whether they have a PhD or they don't. But us women are called Mrs., right, by our first name. or so on, right? Not our titles.
And I actually, this year, went to freshman orientation because after students have been to college for a while, they learn. Sometimes it takes thank you. Sometimes it takes a gentle reminder, and sometimes it is a not so gentle reminder. I don't know how many students have called one of their female professors Ms. or Mrs. and had a very stern response. All of us who are professors, whether we are doctors or professors, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money to earn the right to be called professor or doctor. And well, I am interested in, first from a student's perspective, hopefully part of the discussion can be why you think that that happens with students. And next.
Okay, hello. I can't just fault students because I guess it was a month ago in a faculty meeting, I was actually called young lady by one of my male colleagues. And when asked about it, he said, well, wouldn't you rather be a young lady than an old lady? So yeah, so it's not just students, it's also faculty. But yeah, as far as students go, I've had students say things like, we expect our female instructors to be mean. We don't expect, they have different expectations, I think, for a large extent of female and male faculty. And those are, largely mirroring what's going on in society, the gender stereotypes and ideals and stereotypical gender roles that we all play.
That's interesting. And I kind of just want to piggyback off of Dr. Gosdin here and talk about how the classroom really mirrors what is happening in society, and the classroom's not an exception. What is happening in society, the roles that we play, mother, daughter, wife, we tend to have that expectation in the classroom as well. Sometimes my compassion as a human being is attributed to my gender. And that, kind of to piggyback off of everybody, we've worked really hard for what we have and for our titles. And our titles, while it may seem very picky that, don't call me miss, call me doctor, call me professor, it may seem minor to most. We have worked very hard, and it is symbolic of the inequality that women in academia face.
Yes. You want to say something more? And I'll...
Well, I had a student call me babe once, and I go, no, that's Dr. Babe. If you're going to call me a name, call me by my proper title. Now, I understand that there is a familiarity sometimes with students and instructors, but it's also a modicum of respect. It seems that our male counterparts, in at least some ways, get more respect than we do, and by calling us miss or ma'am in many instances, that demeans us and devalues what we bring as professionals to the classroom.
Okay, when I came to Albany State University, I'm working on my PhD, but I've always been called professor at Western Michigan University, at Keller Community College, and here I've been called professor, but most of the times there's a debate of whether I'm a professor or not. Regardless of if I have a PhD or not, I have earned my title of professor by working in a higher level education institution. Professor, I've got the definition. Professor, 2 it's a noun, has two definitions. It says a teacher of the highest rank in a college or university, an associate professor or an assistant professor. Merriam-Webster says a faculty member of the highest academic rank at the institution of higher education, a teacher at a university. That's what I am. So I don't mind. I really don't care about titles in a way, not that way, but when it comes to respect in a classroom, and I love my students, and we get very familiar and all that, but, a little respect, like I'll call you Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so. So, a little bit of Professor Alvira Watson would be nice, because I worked hard.
We do not say ma'am nearly as much as Southerners do. And I admit it actually does get on my nerves, because for me as a Midwesterner, that is something that would be used towards someone of my grandmother's age. And so I'm not used to it. And when ma'am replaces doctor, that's the problem. And also when I'm being constantly called, especially by first-year students, being constantly called Ms. Diamond. And it's not Ms. like MS, which many women adopt instead of taking a title that relies on marital status. That's the reason for, Ms. It's short in the South for Mrs. And that is so automatic. And I think that that's why at the University of Kansas, where I went to school and where I taught as a graduate student, honestly, most of my students called me by my first name before I received my doctorate, because I had not earned the doctorate yet. But no one called me Mrs. They just didn't. And it is a very Southern thing to think of women as I think of it as M-I-S-S-U-S, right, Mrs., and it comes out Ms. And with students sophomore and up, I'm a little bit more insistent on being called doctor, and with freshmen, I understand. It just seems like they're treating me like a high school teacher, because that's what they're used to.
I've also noticed with titles, if you think about it or deconstruct it, when you think about Mr., that's just one title for a man, but you have Miss, Mrs., or Ms. for women, and that's always in relationship to a man and her relationship, so you're always regarding her and thinking of her in light or in reference to her status with a man. So I think a lot of times we don't think about that, but that is what that is. I've also noticed, just real quick, and Dr. Deane and I have commented on this to each other, how sometimes it's funny how students sometimes feel, and it could be just being comfortable with this. I think, too, the fact that we're seemingly young. I said seemingly. Right, it'll probably be soon. The fact that students will often comment on what we're wearing, our hairstyles, when our hair's changed, things like that. It's not a big deal in and of itself. I doubt that that's happening with our male colleagues. So something else to bring to your attention.
I kind of wanted to comment on the use of ma'am in the South. So far, I have taken the use of ma'am in the classroom and in respect to me as very Southernly, but it also kind of points to my competency. I think sometimes when, again, being young, being female, or seemingly young, some of my students feel like it's okay to challenge me in the classroom, challenge my knowledge base, and that's where I want to impart that titles do get to be important, that I do have a knowledge base.
Yeah, no, I agree. I even had a student not long ago, he was sitting on the front row, one of my better students, and I was making some comment, I think it I can't even remember the class, honestly. It was about stratification, I think. And the class was like seemingly in disbelief. And then my student looked at the class and said, she actually knows what she's talking about. Or she's right on this one, guys.
And it wasn't until that was said, until we got verification or validation
From a male student.
that our class took, takes us seriously.
Titles in, for example, in my country, in Puerto Rico, are, for example, a teacher is maestra, but a teacher or instructor that works at a college, we call them profesora. And that's why, my students in Spanish, for example, they call me profesora, Profesora Alvira Watson, right? And I insist on that because you get into the Spanish ambiance, right? And you gotta live it, right? And that's why at Western, they used to call me professor, right? Here, I hear a lot of men are called professor, but many women are called Mrs., like we're talking about. But we have a professor. We have Professor, I introduced earlier Professor Andre Johnson. I introduced, not Dr. Mundy Shepherd, she's Professor Mundy Shepherd also. Professor Mary Gervin, that just retired from this institution. She had tenure and she had everything but the doctor's degree, and she's called Professor. Right? So that is our point, giving us the title that we deserve.
Now, I do want to point out that even amongst ourselves, we call each other our title until we give each other permission to give our names. Oh, don't call me Dr. Mallory, call me Devona. And that is, even amongst ourselves as professionals in academia, we do that. My advisor, I knew since I was an undergrad, I knew him for 15 years, and I called him Dr. Shields. But when I got my PhD, he goes, you can call me John. And I still have an issue calling him that because I was so used to calling him Dr. Shields. Now also, I did have PhD professors who would come into the classroom the first day and say, hi, I'm Aaron. Hi, I'm Cynthia. And that was a more open-minded view, but we also have to take into consideration, if you want to be called in a particular name, respect other people of what they want to be called. Now, if I told all my students, just go on ahead and call me Devona, that would be, me giving you permission. However, at our institution, in particular, titles are emphasized, and it's a modicum, at least a modicum of respect, all right? And that's why it's important to understand that we are on the same level as our male counterparts. They earned their stripes, we did too. And that's what we really want to convey today.
It is an extremely Midwestern trait. To show respect as treating one another as the same. Does that make sense? So, and I think it's, again, I'm from Nebraska and Kansas, and it just is sort of part of a rural background that everyone has to kind of get together, raise the barn, that kind of thing. And so culturally, for me, people who try to put themselves above others by demanding, oh, you have to call me ma'am, right? Just because I'm older than you or just because I have this job. That is seen as being putting yourself above others. And so it is more Midwestern that we treat each other the same. We all are on first name basis except for ministers, mayors, things like that. So for me, ma'am is an automatic knee-jerk reaction based on perceived age and gender. Doctor, I by God earned. Does that sort of make the difference?
Somewhat, because I think in the South, around this area, we culturally
Yeah. When I really notice it is when I am being very professorial and explaining to a student the mistakes he or she has made, and I get that little tone in my voice, and then it's yes ma'am, yes ma'am, yes ma'am, and I laugh because we fall into automatic cultural behavior. And I understand it, and that's actually why I am in some ways more understanding of especially freshmen calling me Ms. instead of doctor, and I try to gently let them know differently instead of, and I have seen it happen with some of us as female doctors sort of jumping on that, but it's just, we do not often interrogate our own cultural reactions and our own cultural training, and I have lived in the South more than just here. When my husband was military, we lived South Carolina and actually Fort Walton Beach, which is fairly close to here. And it just has always struck me as such an extreme difference because it seems so much more automatically unquestioning hierarchy. Whereas a Midwestern approach to respect is to make sure that no one thinks that I think that I'm better than you. And it is both reactions, both expectations are based on perceptions of respect, but the respect is shown in a different way. Does that make sense?
You know, I think the ma'am here is, well, it's cultural, right? I have learned to accept that ma'am because like her, I'm from Midwest also. I lived there most of my time in Michigan. And the ma'am used to make me cringe, you know, like, oh no, I'm not that old. And, but here is like I've been here since 2006 and I've heard that ma'am and it's grown on me. But professionally, our point is more professionally inside our classrooms and the university. When you answer a question, like I have all my students going like, yes ma'am, fine, that's fine. But when you're calling me, don't call me Mrs. Alvira Watson. No, don't do that. Don't call her Mrs. Diamond. You know, give the title. It makes us feel better, and we've earned it, period.
I do want to say that I do not walk around with doctor on my forehead. Now, when I'm out in public, if someone calls me ma'am, fine. But we're talking about the classroom context here. That's the difference. Yes, I don't go around telling, you know, I don't tell the, you know, the cashier in the grocery store, oh yes, by the way, I have my PhD, so don't call me ma'am. No, I don't do that. But we're just saying in the classroom setting, that's what it's about here. All right, now we're about to wrap up. Does anyone have any other comments or questions? All right, thank you. Now,